Rebecca Sterling thought she was about to throw a nobody out of her bank that morning. But 3 minutes later, the president of the entire institution would come running through those glass doors with panic written across his face. And the humiliation she planned for someone else would become her own destruction. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Stories like this remind people that dignity matters, and your support helps these stories reach more viewers around the world. Now, back to Evelyn Carter. The Atlantic Crown Bank stood in the center of downtown Chicago like a monument to power. Sunlight reflected off the towering glass windows, while luxury sedans rolled past the front entrance every few seconds. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and the quiet hum of wealth filled the air. Men in tailored suits checked investment portfolios worth millions. Women carrying designer handbags spoke softly with private advisors behind frosted glass offices. Every detail inside the bank whispered exclusivity. And then Evelyn Carter walked through the revolving doors wearing a faded gray sweater, dark blue jeans, and a pair of worn brown shoes that had clearly seen better days. At 38 years old, Evelyn carried herself with quiet calm, but most people never noticed calmness when simple clothing gave them an easier reason to judge. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders, untouched by expensive styling, and the canvas bag hanging from her arm looked more suitable for a grocery store than one of the wealthiest banks in America. The security guard near the entrance glanced at her briefly before looking away with visible disinterest. Two younger associates standing near the reception desk exchanged quick looks the moment she entered. One of them smirked slightly before pretending to organize paperwork. Evelyn noticed every reaction. Years of moving through wealthy spaces had taught her how quickly people revealed themselves when they believed someone had no status. Still, she remained polite as she approached the reception counter. "Good morning," she said softly. "I'm here to complete a scheduled transfer." The receptionist barely looked up from her computer screen. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked in a flat tone. "Yes," Evelyn answered calmly. "The appointment should be under Evelyn Carter." The receptionist typed slowly before her expression shifted with mild confusion. There was clearly something unusual attached to the file she had opened, but before she could speak further, a sharp voice interrupted from across the lobby. "Is there a problem here?" The voice belonged to Rebecca Sterling, the branch manager. Rebecca walked toward the counter in a fitted navy blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. At 42, she carried the polished confidence of someone who believed authority made her superior. Her makeup was flawless. Her diamond earrings sparkled beneath the chandelier lights. And the moment her eyes landed on Evelyn, silent judgment settled across her face almost instantly. Rebecca didn't see a respected client. She saw a woman who didn't belong inside her bank, and that single mistake was about to cost her everything. Rebecca Sterling had spent 15 years climbing through the ranks of Atlantic Crown Bank, and somewhere along the way she had developed a dangerous belief that wealth could be recognized by shoes, watches, and designer labels. The moment she saw Evelyn Carter standing quietly beside the reception desk with a canvas bag hanging from her shoulder, Rebecca decided exactly what kind of woman she was dealing with. And like many arrogant people, she never imagined how expensive that assumption would become. Rebecca approached the counter with controlled elegance, offering the receptionist a thin smile before turning her attention toward Evelyn. "Ma'am," she said politely, though the condescension beneath her voice was impossible to miss, "Atlantic Crown operates primarily through private appointments for high-value transactions. Are you certain you are in the correct branch?" Evelyn met her gaze calmly. "Yes," she answered softly. "I have a scheduled transfer meeting for 10:30 this morning." Rebecca folded her arms. "And what exactly is the nature of this transfer?" Nearby employees pretended not to listen while quietly watching from behind computer screens. Evelyn opened her canvas bag and removed a neatly organized folder containing legal documents, financial statements, and transfer authorization forms. "It involves funding for a scholarship initiative," she explained. "The amount exceeds $8 million, so your corporate office requested an in-person verification." The number alone should have changed everything. Instead, Rebecca's eyes narrowed with suspicion. $8 million did not fit the image standing in front of her. In Rebecca's world, wealthy women arrived wearing luxury coats and carrying handbags worth more than most people's monthly rent. They did not wear faded sweaters and practical shoes. "I see," Rebecca replied slowly. She glanced down at the paperwork but made no effort to touch it. "And these funds belong to you?" Evelyn nodded once. "They belong to the Carter Educational Foundation." A faint smirk crossed Rebecca's lips. "Of course they do." The receptionist shifted uncomfortably beside her keyboard. Even she could hear the mockery in Rebecca's voice now. Several customers seated in the waiting area had begun watching openly. An older man lowered his newspaper slightly while a younger couple whispered quietly to one another. Evelyn remained composed, but the atmosphere inside the bank had changed. Rebecca leaned slightly closer across the marble counter. "Ma'am, Atlantic Crown takes financial fraud very seriously. Large transactions require extensive verification, especially when documentation appears unusual." Evelyn blinked once. "Unusual?" Rebecca gave a tight smile. "You have no financial advisor with you, no legal representation, no executive assistant. Frankly, this does not look like someone handling an $8 million transfer." The words landed heavily across the silent lobby. One of the junior employees lowered his eyes, embarrassed by the public humiliation unfolding in front of him. Evelyn carefully closed the folder without reacting emotionally. That calmness irritated Rebecca even more. Arrogant people often become angrier when their cruelty fails to provoke weakness. "I can provide any identification you need," Evelyn said gently. "That will not be necessary right now," Rebecca interrupted sharply. "What I need first is confirmation that these documents are legitimate." She glanced toward the security desk for only a second, but the meaning was clear. And somewhere deep inside the bank, far above the marble lobby where Rebecca Sterling believed she controlled everything, an emergency elevator had already begun descending toward the first floor. The silence inside Atlantic Crown Bank had become strangely heavy, the kind of silence that appears when people sense something uncomfortable unfolding but are too curious to look away. Rebecca Sterling stood behind the marble counter with the confidence of someone who believed the entire room was on her side. She had embarrassed difficult clients before. She had removed disruptive people before. And as she stared at Evelyn Carter, standing quietly with her folder held neatly against her chest, Rebecca convinced herself this situation would end the same way. What she did not realize was that several employees had already begun noticing details she had completely ignored. The receptionist glanced nervously at the transfer documents that had briefly appeared inside the folder moments earlier. Even from a distance, she had recognized official federal seals and executive authorization signatures that ordinary people never carried. But Rebecca's growing arrogance had already taken control of the room. "I am going to ask you one more time," Rebecca said sharply. "Where exactly did these funds come from?" Evelyn answered with the same calm tone she had maintained since entering the building. "The Carter Educational Foundation." Rebecca tilted her head slightly. "And you expect me to believe that someone dressed like this controls an organization moving $8 million through Atlantic Crown?" A faint murmur moved across the waiting area. The humiliation was no longer subtle. It had become public entertainment. An elderly woman seated near the investment offices frowned with visible discomfort, while a younger man pretending to check his phone secretly continued listening. Evelyn could feel every pair of eyes settling onto her, but years of quiet discipline kept her expression steady. In another life, she might have responded emotionally. But Evelyn had learned long ago that powerful people often expose themselves best when uninterrupted. Rebecca extended her hand suddenly. "Let me see your identification." Evelyn handed over her driver's license without argument. Rebecca examined it for barely 2 seconds before giving a short, dismissive laugh. "Interesting," she muttered. "No corporate title listed anywhere." She handed the identification back as though it proved something important. "Ma'am, people attempting fraudulent transfers often rely on fabricated charities and emotional stories. You understand why this situation raises concerns." One of the younger employees quietly inhaled. The accusation had crossed a line now. Evelyn slowly placed her identification back into her bag. "You are free to verify the foundation directly," she said softly. "Your executive office already approved this appointment yesterday afternoon." Rebecca smiled coldly. "I highly doubt anyone from executive leadership approved this." She turned toward the receptionist. "Cancel whatever appointment is attached to this name." The receptionist hesitated. "MS. Sterling, the authorization came directly from—" "I said cancel it." The young woman immediately lowered her eyes and obeyed. Rebecca looked back at Evelyn with growing satisfaction. Power had become addictive to her over the years, and humiliating someone she viewed as beneath her gave her a cruel sense of control. Atlantic Crown serves serious financial clients. Rebecca continued loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "This is not some community credit union where anyone can walk in off the street making outrageous claims." The room fell completely silent again. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the towering glass windows facing downtown Chicago. Snow had begun falling lightly outside, soft white flakes drifting across the morning traffic. For a brief moment, she almost looked sad rather than offended. Sad that people still measured human worth so quickly. Then Rebecca made the mistake that would destroy her career. She reached for the phone beside the counter and pressed a security extension. "Yes," she said calmly while maintaining eye contact with Evelyn. "I need assistance in the main lobby immediately." The moment Rebecca Sterling placed the call for security, the atmosphere inside Atlantic Crown Bank shifted completely. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Keyboard typing faded into silence. Even the soft jazz music flowing through the hidden ceiling speakers suddenly felt distant beneath the growing tension spreading across the marble lobby. Rebecca lowered the phone slowly, clearly satisfied with herself. She had crossed the point of basic humiliation now. This had become a public removal. And somewhere deep inside her mind, she believed everyone watching would admire her authority for it. Evelyn Carter stood perfectly still near the counter, one hand resting lightly against the canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. Her calmness unsettled several employees more than anger would have. Most people became defensive when embarrassed publicly. Most people raised their voices. Evelyn did none of those things. Instead, she looked toward Rebecca with quiet disappointment, as though she had hoped for something better from her. 2 uniformed security guards soon appeared from the far hallway near the executive offices. Their polished black shoes echoed softly across the marble floor as they approached the reception area. One of them, a middle-aged man named Carl, glanced between Rebecca and Evelyn with visible uncertainty. "Problem here, MS. Sterling?" he asked carefully. Rebecca straightened immediately. "Yes," she said loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "This woman is attempting to conduct suspicious financial activity and refuses to cooperate with verification procedures." The accusation landed heavily across the room. Evelyn slowly turned toward the security guards. "I have cooperated fully," she said calmly. "I provided identification and appointment confirmation." Rebecca gave a short laugh. "An appointment that does not exist anymore." Carl hesitated. He had worked security at Atlantic Crown for nearly 11 years, and experience had taught him to recognize dangerous people quickly. Evelyn Carter did not look dangerous. She looked composed, thoughtful, almost painfully respectful despite the humiliation unfolding around her. The younger guard shifted awkwardly beside him. "Ma'am," Carl began carefully, Perhaps it would be best if we stepped aside privately and cleared this up. Rebecca interrupted before Evelyn could answer. No, I want her removed from the premises. A hush fell over the entire lobby. Even Rebecca's own employees looked shocked now. One of the financial advisors quietly stood from his office chair, clearly considering whether to intervene. But years inside corporate culture had trained most of them to stay silent when management crossed ethical lines. Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice soft but steady. Before you do this, she said gently, I think you should contact Harrison Blake. The name hung briefly in the air. Rebecca's expression hardened instantly. Excuse me? Evelyn held her gaze calmly. Mr. Blake is expecting confirmation once the transfer documents are finalized. For the first time all morning, uncertainty flickered across Rebecca Sterling's face. Harrison Blake was not just another executive. He was the president of Atlantic Crown National Holdings. Most branch employees never even spoke his name directly. Rebecca recovered quickly, forcing out another cold smile. You expect me to believe you personally know Harrison Blake? Evelyn did not answer immediately. She simply reached into her bag and carefully removed a slim silver business card. Rebecca snatched it from her hand impatiently. Her eyes scanned the card once, then twice. The color in her face changed almost invisibly, because embossed beneath Evelyn Carter's name were words Rebecca never expected to see. Senior Strategic Advisor, Executive Board Liaison, Atlantic Crown National Holdings. The room went silent again, but before Rebecca could fully process what she was seeing, a sudden sound echoed across the lobby. The private executive elevator doors had opened. The polished silver doors of the executive elevator slid open with a soft mechanical chime that instantly pulled every eye in the lobby toward the far end of the bank. For one suspended moment, nobody moved. Then Harrison Blake stepped out at a pace that did not match the calm image employees were accustomed to seeing from him. The president of Atlantic Crown National Holdings almost never visited local branches personally, and he certainly never rushed. Yet that morning, his expensive black overcoat remained partially unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened, and his expression carried an urgency that immediately sent tension rippling across the room. Several employees straightened so quickly their chairs rolled backward against the marble floor. Carl, the older security guard, lowered his hand from his radio instantly. Rebecca Sterling froze beside the reception counter, the silver business card still trembling faintly between her fingers. Harrison Blake scanned the lobby only once before spotting Evelyn Carter standing quietly near the counter beside the two security guards. Relief crossed his face so visibly that multiple employees exchanged stunned glances. "Evelyn," he said sharply as he walked toward her, "I have been trying to reach you for the last 15 minutes. The entire lobby went silent, not respectful silence, shocked silence. Rebecca's mouth parted slightly as Harrison Blake stopped directly in front of Evelyn Carter instead of management. "I apologize," Evelyn answered softly. "My phone was inside my bag." Harrison exhaled slowly, clearly trying to contain frustration. "When corporate informed me there was a security issue involving your appointment downstairs, I thought there had been some kind of emergency." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Security issue, involving your appointment. Every word hit harder than the last. Harrison finally turned toward her, and the warmth disappeared from his expression immediately. "MS. Sterling," he said coldly. "Explain what is happening here." Rebecca opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first. Around her, employees avoided eye contact completely. The receptionist stared down at her keyboard while pretending to organize documents she could no longer even read properly. "Sir," Rebecca began nervously, "there appeared to be inconsistencies regarding identification and transaction verification procedures, so I followed standard security protocol." Harrison Blake looked toward the security guards. "Did MS. Carter behave aggressively?" "No, sir," Carl answered immediately. "Was she disruptive?" "No, sir." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why exactly was security called? Rebecca swallowed hard. The room felt smaller now, hotter. Every polished surface around her suddenly reflected humiliation instead of authority. I believed the transaction might be fraudulent. Harrison turned slowly toward Evelyn. The $8 million scholarship transfer? Evelyn nodded once. Yes. Harrison looked back at Rebecca with complete disbelief. The transfer personally approved by my office yesterday afternoon? Rebecca's breathing became shallow. I was not informed that. Harrison interrupted sharply. You were not informed because you never checked. The words echoed across the marble lobby with devastating clarity. A hush fell so completely that even the distant traffic outside the glass windows seemed louder now. Harrison Blake stepped closer to the counter. Do you have any idea who MS Carter is? Rebecca could not answer. Her confidence had collapsed entirely. Harrison gestured toward Evelyn with visible respect. 5 years ago, during the national financial collapse, Evelyn Carter designed the restructuring model that prevented Atlantic Crown from losing over $2 billion in educational investment assets. Several employees visibly reacted to the number, $2 billion. Harrison continued calmly, though disappointment sharpened every word. She refused public recognition. She refused bonuses. And she continued quietly funding scholarship programs for low-income students across this country, while people like you judged her based on a sweater. Rebecca Sterling looked at Evelyn again, but this time the quiet woman standing beside the counter no longer looked ordinary at all. And for the first time that morning, Rebecca finally understood the disaster she had created. Rebecca Sterling had built her career around appearances. Expensive watches impressed her. Luxury handbags earned her respect. Tailored suits opened doors instantly. But standing there, beneath the crystal chandeliers of Atlantic Crown Bank, surrounded by employees too stunned to speak, she was finally confronting a truth she had ignored her entire life. The most powerful person in the room had arrived wearing faded shoes and carrying a canvas bag. Harrison Blake remained silent for several heavy seconds, while Rebecca struggled to recover her composure. The silence itself became unbearable. Every employee in the lobby could feel the balance of power shifting in real time. Rebecca glanced toward Evelyn Carter again, hoping perhaps to find anger on her face, some sign that this humiliation might still be survivable if she apologized quickly enough. But Evelyn's expression remained calm. Gentle even, that somehow made the situation worse. Harrison slowly removed his gloves and placed them on the marble counter beside Rebecca's trembling hand. Do you know why MS Carter avoids publicity? He asked quietly. Rebecca swallowed hard. No, sir. Harrison nodded once. Because she believes charity should never become performance. He gestured toward Evelyn with visible admiration. 3 years ago, she anonymously paid off lunch debt for over 12,000 public school students across Illinois. Several nearby customers exchanged stunned looks. Harrison continued. Last winter, when 2 community colleges nearly shut down scholarship programs after state funding cuts, she covered the entire shortfall personally. Rebecca's breathing became shallow again. The receptionist looked visibly emotional now, realizing the woman they had nearly removed from the bank had spent years quietly changing lives while expecting nothing in return. Harrison turned toward Evelyn. I am deeply sorry for how you were treated this morning. Evelyn gave a small nod. Thank you, Harrison. Rebecca flinched hearing the familiarity in her voice. She had spent years trying to gain direct access to executives at Harrison Blake's level, yet this quiet woman addressed him like an old friend. Harrison looked back toward branch management, and the disappointment in his eyes hardened further. Atlantic Crown was founded on trust, he said firmly. Not appearances, not status symbols. Trust. Nobody moved, nobody even dared whisper. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper now. MS Carter, I apologize if there was any misunderstanding. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment before answering. There was no misunderstanding. The words landed softly, but they cut deeper than anger ever could. Rebecca lowered her eyes instantly. Evelyn continued calmly. You saw someone dressed simply and decided they could not possibly belong here. The marble lobby felt painfully quiet again. Outside the enormous glass windows, snow continued drifting slowly through downtown Chicago while traffic crawled past beneath gray winter skies. Inside the bank, dozens of people stood frozen inside a moment none of them would forget. Evelyn carefully picked up her folder from the counter. The unfortunate thing, she said gently, is that people who truly need compassion rarely look impressive when they walk through those doors. Carl, the older security guard, quietly looked away. The younger employees stood motionless, ashamed they had watched the humiliation unfold without speaking. Harrison Blake nodded slowly as though Evelyn had just reminded everyone in the building of something important they had forgotten long ago. Rebecca's eyes began to glisten slightly now, though she fought desperately to maintain professionalism. Years of authority could not protect her from the crushing realizations settling over her. She had not embarrassed a fraud. She had publicly humiliated one of the most respected people connected to the entire institution. And somehow the quiet dignity in Evelyn Carter's voice made that realization hurt even more. For several long seconds after Evelyn Carter finished speaking, nobody inside Atlantic Crown Bank seemed to remember how to move. The marble lobby that normally echoed with polished business conversations and confident footsteps had fallen into complete silence. Even the customers waiting near the investment offices sat frozen in their chairs, watching a woman they had dismissed only minutes earlier quietly dismantle years of arrogance without ever raising her voice. Rebecca Sterling stood motionless behind the reception counter, her carefully controlled image collapsing piece by piece beneath the weight of humiliation and regret. Harrison Blake looked around the room slowly, his expression hardening further as he noticed the faces of employees avoiding eye contact. He had spent decades building Atlantic Crown into one of the most respected financial institutions in the country, but moments like this reminded him how quickly culture inside powerful organizations could rot when people began worshiping appearances instead of character. Everyone in this lobby just witnessed a failure, Harrison said calmly. The words echoed sharply across the polished marble walls. Rebecca lowered her head slightly. Harrison continued, not a failure of banking procedures, a failure of human judgment. The younger receptionist quietly wiped moisture from beneath her eye before looking back down at her computer screen. One of the financial advisors shifted uncomfortably near the glass offices, clearly ashamed that he had remained silent while the humiliation unfolded. Evelyn noticed all of it. She noticed the guilt, the embarrassment, the sudden fear spreading through employees who now realized how cruel the situation had become. But she also understood something else. Most people were not truly malicious. Many simply became weak when authority pointed them in the wrong direction. Harrison turned toward Carl, the older security guard. Thank you for handling yourself professionally. Carl nodded respectfully. I was only trying to keep things calm, sir. Harrison glanced briefly toward Rebecca before answering quietly, You showed more wisdom than management did today. Rebecca closed her eyes for one painful second. Every sentence now felt like another crack spreading through the professional identity she had spent years building. Evelyn gently placed a hand on the marble counter. Harrison, she said softly, I do not want anyone publicly punished on my behalf. Several employees looked up immediately in surprise. Rebecca herself seemed stunned. Harrison frowned slightly. Evelyn, what happened here was unacceptable. I know, Evelyn replied calmly, but humiliation does not become dignity simply because the direction changes. The room went silent again. Those words struck harder than any anger could have. Rebecca slowly looked toward Evelyn, confusion mixing with shame across her face. She had expected outrage, demands, consequences. Instead, the woman she humiliated was protecting her from public destruction. Harrison studied Evelyn quietly for a moment before giving a slow nod of understanding. He had known her long enough to recognize the consistency of her character. Quiet strength, quiet compassion, even toward people who did not deserve it. "Very well," Harrison said finally, "but this matter will still be addressed appropriately." Rebecca's hands tightened slightly against the counter edge. She understood exactly what that meant: corporate review, executive investigation, possibly the end of her career at Atlantic Crown. Yet somehow none of that hurt as much as the look she had seen in Evelyn Carter's eyes moments earlier. Not hatred, not revenge, just disappointment. Outside, snow continued drifting through downtown Chicago, while inside the bank the atmosphere had completely transformed. Customers who once watched Evelyn with suspicion now looked at her with admiration. Employees who had ignored her presence earlier now stood carefully attentive whenever she moved. And through it all, Evelyn remained exactly the same woman who had quietly walked through the revolving doors that morning in a faded sweater and worn shoes, proving once again that true dignity never needs expensive clothing to announce itself. Harrison Blake personally escorted Evelyn Carter away from the reception counter and toward the executive conference wing overlooking downtown Chicago. The employees standing throughout the marble lobby instinctively stepped aside as they passed, their expressions transformed completely from the quiet judgment that had greeted her earlier that morning. Some looked ashamed. Others looked stunned, but all of them now understood they had witnessed something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding inside a bank branch. Rebecca Sterling remained behind the counter for several seconds after they walked away, unable to move immediately. The polished lobby that once made her feel powerful now felt painfully exposed. Every whisper seemed louder, every glance heavier. The younger receptionist finally looked toward her manager carefully. "Ms. Sterling," she said softly, "I did try to mention that the authorization came from executive leadership." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. "I know," she answered quietly. It was the first genuinely human thing anyone had heard from her all morning. Inside the executive conference room upstairs, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed snow drifting across the Chicago skyline, while warm light reflected against polished walnut walls. Harrison personally poured coffee for Evelyn before taking a seat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Harrison finally exhaled deeply. "I should never have allowed our branches to become this disconnected from the values we claim to represent." Evelyn stirred her coffee slowly. "Large institutions forget themselves sometimes," she replied gently. "It happens when people become too focused on image." Harrison nodded grimly. Still, what happened downstairs was unacceptable. Evelyn glanced toward the snowy skyline beyond the glass. "Do you know why I continue dressing this way?" Harrison gave a small smile. "Because you stopped caring what wealthy people think 20 years ago." A faint smile touched Evelyn's face for the first time all morning. "Partly." She looked back toward him calmly. "But mostly because I wanted to understand how ordinary people are treated when nobody believes they are important." Harrison became quiet. He already knew the answer before she continued. "And today confirmed exactly why the scholarship program matters," Evelyn said softly. "Too many people are taught from childhood that appearances determine value." Downstairs, the atmosphere inside Atlantic Crown Bank remained painfully tense. Rebecca Sterling sat alone inside her glass office, while corporate compliance officers quietly arrived from headquarters. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. The arrogance that had filled the building earlier had vanished entirely. Carl, the older security guard, watched silently from near the entrance as employees moved with nervous professionalism. Several younger staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances whenever they passed Rebecca's office. The entire branch understood something irreversible had happened, not because an executive had become angry, but because the truth about their culture had been exposed publicly. Nearly 40 minutes later, Evelyn and Harrison returned downstairs together. The lobby immediately fell silent again. Rebecca stepped out of her office the moment she saw them approaching. Her posture remained professional, but the confidence that once sharpened every movement was gone completely. Harrison stopped near the reception counter. "Ms. Sterling," he said calmly, Corporate leadership will conduct a formal review regarding today's incident. Rebecca nodded slowly. I understand, sir. Harrison remained silent for a moment before adding, until then, you are relieved from direct client supervision responsibilities. The words were delivered professionally, quietly, but they landed with devastating finality. Rebecca accepted them without argument because deep down she knew the consequences had begun long before corporate involvement. They had begun the moment she looked at a quiet woman in a faded sweater and decided she was unworthy of respect. Evelyn watched Rebecca carefully for a brief moment before speaking softly. I hope someday this becomes a lesson rather than only a punishment. Rebecca looked at her with visible emotion now. You are kinder than I deserve. Evelyn answered gently, kindness is easiest when people remember their humanity. And once again, the room went silent. By late afternoon, the snow outside Atlantic Crown Bank had begun settling along the sidewalks of downtown Chicago, softening the noise of the city beneath a cold, gray sky. Inside the branch, however, nobody would remember the weather that day. They would remember the silence. The silence after Harrison Blake walked into the lobby. The silence after Rebecca Sterling realized who Evelyn Carter truly was. And most of all, the silence that followed every calm sentence spoken by the woman everyone had underestimated. Evelyn stood near the front entrance preparing to leave while employees quietly moved around the branch with unusual care. Conversations remained softer now. Smiles felt more genuine. Even the atmosphere inside the building seemed humbled somehow, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the lesson unfolding there all morning. Carl, the older security guard, stepped toward Evelyn first. "Ms. Carter," he said respectfully, "I wanted to apologize for how things were handled earlier." Evelyn offered him a warm smile. "You treated me with respect the moment you arrived. That matters more than you realize." Carl nodded quietly, visibly relieved. Nearby, the young receptionist gathered enough courage to approach next. "I am sorry too," she whispered. "I should have spoken up sooner." Evelyn gently touched the young woman's arm. "Doing the right thing becomes easier once fear stops making decisions for us." The receptionist lowered her eyes, emotional but grateful. Across the lobby, Rebecca Sterling remained standing inside her glass office, watching the exchange unfold. Her executive access badge had already been temporarily deactivated pending corporate review. The title she had spent years protecting suddenly felt meaningless compared to the dignity she had lost in a single morning. When Evelyn finally turned toward the revolving doors, Rebecca stepped out from her office unexpectedly. The entire lobby seemed to pause again. Rebecca approached slowly, no longer carrying the polished arrogance that once defined every movement she made. She looked exhausted now. "Human. Ms. Carter," she said quietly. Evelyn stopped. Rebecca struggled for words before finally speaking with painful honesty. "I spent so many years trying to impress powerful people that I forgot how to see ordinary ones." Evelyn looked at her calmly. "There are no ordinary people, Rebecca." The words struck with quiet force. Rebecca's eyes filled slightly as she nodded. "I understand that now." For the first time all day, Harrison Blake said nothing. He simply watched the moment unfold in silence because some lessons became more powerful without interruption. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her canvas bag over her shoulder before walking toward the glass entrance doors. Employees instinctively stepped aside again, but this time it was not fear or status creating the silence around her. It was respect, genuine respect. As she reached the doors, Harrison called out softly behind her. "Evelyn." She turned slightly. Harrison smiled faintly. "The scholarship transfer will be completed by close of business today." Evelyn nodded once. "Good. The students should not suffer because adults forgot how to behave." A few employees lowered their eyes immediately after hearing that. The truth in her words settled heavily across the lobby. Then, without another word, Evelyn Carter stepped outside into the falling snow and disappeared into the crowded Chicago sidewalks exactly the same way she had arrived that morning. Quietly. No limousine waiting outside. No photographers. No dramatic display of wealth or power. Just a simple woman in a faded gray sweater walking through a city full of people still learning not to judge worth by appearances. And inside Atlantic Crown Bank, long after she was gone, nobody forgot what dignity looked like that day.